At 28, Elena had mastered the art of survival. Between grueling double shifts at Benny's Grill, a fading roadside diner that had seen better days, and the relentless weight of overdue bills, she barely had a moment to breathe. The flickering open sign outside struggled to stay lit, much like her own dwindling energy. But despite everything, the exhaustion, the long hours, the thankless work, she kept moving forward. That night, the city was drenched in an unforgiving downpour, the kind that seeped into bones and turned pavement into rivers. Elena wrapped her arms around herself as she hurried down the street, her stomach twisting, not just from hunger, but from the all-too-familiar discomfort of her period. It had crept up on her mid-shift, staining her uniform before she even noticed. Heat flushed her face, but she quickly tied her sweater around her waist, covering the evidence. There was no time for embarrassment. She just needed to get home. Then she saw him. Curled up beneath the dim glow of a bus stop was a boy, no older than 8, his thin arms wrapped around himself in a futile attempt to stay warm. His clothes were soaked, his body trembling, and when he lifted his head at the sound of her footsteps, his eyes held nothing but exhaustion. Elena's chest tightened. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, kneeling beside him, ignoring the rain that soaked her knees. "Are you alone?" The boy nodded hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't eaten all day." That was all she needed to hear. Without a second thought, she reached for his hand and gently pulled him up. It didn't matter that she was already drained, that she was cold, or that she had her own burdens to bear. Right now, he needed her more than she needed rest. Back at the diner, she sat him down in a corner booth, wrapped him in a dry towel from the supply closet, and placed a steaming plate of pasta in front of him. The moment he took his first hesitant bite, his face lit up with relief. A warmth spread through her chest, replacing the chill that had clung to her all night. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching. Across the street, a dark gray Aston Martin sat idling, its headlights casting a faint glow on the wet pavement. Inside, Adrian Hayes leaned back against the leather seat, his hand resting against his chin as he observed the scene unfold through the rain-streaked window. He hadn't meant to stop. After a long day of meetings and power plays, he had taken the longer route home, hoping the quiet streets would offer some sense of calm. But then he saw her. At first, it was just mild curiosity, a young woman, drenched in rain, kneeling beside a child in the middle of the night. But as he watched her lead the boy inside, her exhaustion evident but her kindness unwavering, something in him shifted. Not many people stopped. Even fewer cared. His fingers drummed absently against the steering wheel as he glanced toward the neon-lit name of the diner. Then, without fully understanding why, he pulled out his phone and typed it into his notes. Moments later, he drove off, but the image of her lingered in his mind. Soaked to the bone, exhausted yet determined, offering comfort when she barely had enough to spare for herself. And for the first time in years, something other than numbers and deals held his interest. Elena barely had a second to catch her breath before a sharp voice cut through the chatter of Benny's Grill. "Elena, you call this service?" Her boss, Mr. Grant, a man with a permanently furrowed brow, scowled at her from behind the counter. "Table 4's been waiting 10 minutes for their order. Do you think we're running a charity here?" Elena swallowed the frustration bubbling in her chest. She had been balancing 2 shifts, dealing with a faulty coffee machine, and covering for a coworker who conveniently disappeared every time the place got busy. But she forced a smile, nodding quickly. "Yes, sir. I'll get it right away." As she rushed back to the kitchen, the bell above the entrance jingled. A man stepped inside, his sharp, tailored suit making him look entirely out of place among the truckers, retirees, and families huddled over their meals. Adrian Hayes observed the place with mild curiosity. He had never set foot in a diner like this. Small, cramped, the smell of fried food hanging thick in the air. Yet his gaze wasn't on the outdated decor or the laminated menus. It was on her, Elena, the woman who had unknowingly captured his attention that rainy night. She didn't see him at first, too busy multitasking, grabbing plates, refilling coffee cups, dodging her boss's glares. But even as she moved frantically from table to table, she never lost that warm touch. She knelt to speak to an elderly man whose hands shook as he reached for his spoon. She laughed softly with a little girl, helping her balance her juice cup so it wouldn't spill. And even after being yelled at, she still greeted the next customer with an unwavering kindness. Adrian chose a booth in the farthest corner, quietly observing. When she finally approached his table, notepad in hand, she was still catching her breath. Strands of her dark hair clung to her forehead from the rush. "Good evening, sir," she said, as politely as if she hadn't just been berated a minute ago. "What can I get for you?" Adrian glanced at the menu, but barely registered the words. Instead, he studied her. How exhaustion lined her face, yet didn't dull her spirit. "I'll have whatever your best meal is," he said, then added, "and I'd like you to take a break and join me for a coffee." Elena blinked, surprised. "Oh, I appreciate that, but I don't really take breaks during shifts." His lips curved slightly. "Then consider it a favor to a first-time customer." She hesitated but gave a light laugh. "All right, but just for a few minutes." After bringing him his meal, a simple but hearty serving of roast chicken and mashed potatoes, Elena finally sat for a moment, wrapping her hands around a steaming cup of coffee. Adrian didn't dive into business talk or throw money around like most wealthy men she had encountered at high-end restaurants during her short stint as a server uptown. Instead, he asked about the diner, about how long she'd worked there, about the people she served every day. And somehow she found herself answering. "Been here a few years now. It's tough, but I get by," she said, sipping her coffee. "It helps when you love people, even the grumpy ones." His eyes held something unreadable as he listened. Not many would see it that way. She shrugged, offering a small smile. "I guess kindness is free, so why not give it?" Adrian had met countless people, powerful CEOs, ruthless investors, politicians who could buy and sell cities. But none of them had spoken like this. None of them had ever done what she had on that stormy night. When Elena got up to clear the table, Adrian placed his bill under his plate. She didn't think twice before picking it up, but then something odd caught her eye. A folded envelope tucked neatly beneath it. Frowning, she opened it, only to feel her breath hitch. Inside wasn't just a tip. It was an absurd amount, several crisp $100 bills stacked together, easily over $1,000. Her hands trembled as she quickly looked around, searching for the man who had left it. But Adrian was already gone, his sleek gray Aston Martin nowhere in sight. For the rest of the night, Elena's mind raced. Who was he? And why would someone like him leave that kind of tip for a simple meal and a coffee? The next morning, Elena pushed open the doors of the diner, the question still lingering in her mind. She had half a mind to return the money if she ever saw him again, because as much as she needed it, accepting charity felt wrong. She barely had time to dwell on it before the lunchtime rush hit. Plates clattered, orders piled up, and Mr. Grant's voice barked from the kitchen. But then, as she was scribbling down an order, the front door swung open, and everything around her seemed to pause. The same man stood there. Adrian. His expensive suit and polished demeanor still made him stick out, but this time, Elena noticed something different. He wasn't just another rich businessman looking for a novelty experience. He was here for her. Her suspicions were confirmed when the hostess approached, murmuring, "That gentleman requested you to be his server." Elena's brows furrowed. Hesitant but curious, she made her way to his table, notepad ready. "You again?" she said lightly. "Did you come back for the roast chicken or the coffee?" His smirk was subtle. "Neither," I came back to ask you something." She folded her arms. "If this is about the tip, it's not about the money," he interrupted smoothly. "It's about you." She hesitated, unsure what to say. His voice was even, but there was something beneath it, something that felt far too personal for a man who had just walked into her life. He leaned forward slightly. "Do you remember helping someone a few nights ago? A boy on the street?" Elena's breath caught. "Yes, I do." "How do you know about that?" Adrian's gaze never wavered. "Because I was there. I saw you." Elena's heart pounded. He had been watching? Why? "Most people would have walked by without a second glance," Adrian continued. "But you didn't." He slid a small, folded piece of paper across the table. "Open this after I leave." And just like before she could press for answers, he stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out, leaving her gripping the note with trembling fingers. Whatever was written inside, Elena knew one thing for certain. Her life was about to change. Elena stared at the folded piece of paper in her hands, a mixture of confusion and hesitation flickering in her eyes. She wasn't one to snoop, but curiosity had a way of winning battles it had no business fighting. With a slow, cautious breath, she unfolded the note. Her heart nearly stopped. A check. Not for a couple hundred, not even a few thousand, but an amount so staggering that her knees nearly buckled. $250,000. Her breath came in short, uneven bursts as she reread the figure, certain she had imagined a few extra zeros. Beneath the check, written in elegant, unmistakable handwriting, was a simple message. "Your kindness deserves more than just a thank you. Use this to build the life you've always dreamed of. A grateful stranger." Elena clutched the note, her hands trembling. Her gaze shot toward the door, her feet moving before her mind could catch up. She burst outside, scanning the street, but the man was gone. His sleek, gray Aston Martin had vanished, leaving nothing but questions in its wake. She spent that night in her cramped apartment, staring at the check like it might disappear if she blinked too hard. This had to be some kind of mistake, right? No one, absolutely no one, just handed out $250,000 to a stranger. She considered tearing it up. She thought about tracking him down just to return it. But deep down, another thought crept in, one she had never dared to entertain before. What if this was her chance? Days turned into weeks, and the check remained uncashed. Every time she reached for it, guilt pricked at her like tiny needles. But then she thought about her future, about the endless double shifts, the nights spent wondering if she'd ever escape this cycle, the dream that had always felt just out of reach. And so, after a week of sleepless deliberation, she made a decision. She quit Benny's Grill. Then, she rented a space in the heart of the city, a small but charming spot on a bustling street. She spent every penny wisely, turning the empty storefront into Hearth and Haven, a cozy bakery cafe with an open-door policy for those who needed a warm meal but couldn't afford one. It wasn't just a business, it was a mission. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was building something that mattered. The weeks passed in a blur of flour-dusted countertops, early morning dough-making, and late-night bookkeeping. Hearth and Haven was a risk, but people showed up, not just for the food, but for the kindness. Customers who had once been ignored found a place that welcomed them. Struggling families left with full stomachs. And yet, despite everything she had built, there was one question that never left her mind. Who was he? One evening, as Elena locked up the café, a sleek car rolled up beside her. She froze, her pulse hammering as the tinted window slowly lowered. And there he was, Adrian Hayes, the mysterious billionaire who had turned her life upside down. "I was hoping I'd find you," he said smoothly, stepping out of the car, his suit immaculate as ever. Elena folded her arms, half in disbelief, half in suspicion. "You have a habit of disappearing after dropping life-changing amounts of money on strangers. A smirk tugged at his lips. And you have a habit of turning small acts of kindness into something extraordinary. She narrowed her eyes. Why did you do it? And don't give me the grateful stranger routine. You don't just give away that kind of money for no reason. His expression softened. Because I saw something rare in you. That night in the rain, you gave without expecting anything in return. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that money isn't the only thing that holds value. Elena swallowed hard, caught between skepticism and something she couldn't quite name. So what now? She asked. You found me. Are you here to check if I wasted your money? His lips curved in amusement. Number, I'm here to invite you to dinner. She blinked. Dinner? Yes, you built something incredible, Elena. I'd like to hear more about it. His gaze held steady. And more about you. A million thoughts flooded her mind, but before she could overthink it, she found herself saying, Fine, but if this is some rich guy guilt trip, I'm ordering the most expensive thing on the menu. Adrian chuckled. I'd expect nothing less. As she stepped into his car, she realized something. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just waiting for life to happen. She was finally in control of her own story. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Elena's journey is a testament to the power of kindness, resilience, and taking a chance on the unknown. She never saw herself as extraordinary, just a woman trying to get by, offering warmth to others even when she had little herself. Yet, that one act of selflessness changed her life in ways she never imagined. If you love this story and want more inspiring and heartfelt tales, please subscribe to support our growth.